Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are today. We are thrilled to be here. My name is Jeremy Bailenson, and I'd like to introduce Yelena first.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yelena Drabkin, and I am VP of Product here at Strivr. I come with 15 years of experience building successful products from startups to Fortune 500. And innovation is something that I'm really excited about, and that's what Strivr is all about.
So my name is Jeremy Bailenson, and I'm going to begin this webinar, and then I'm going to hand off to Yelena. I'm a professor at Stanford University. I've been building, testing, and studying virtual reality since the late 1990s. My PhD is in psychology, where my dissertation was about understanding how the brain works by running experiments and trying to simulate what happens in the brain on computers. In 1999, I switched to become a VR guy. And I began to learn how to build VR, how to test its effects on people. In the year 2003, I switched to Stanford University, where I founded the Virtual Human Interaction Lab. And at the lab, we study VR as a medium. If you think about how to study media, you see when people use it, how it affects them, what are good applications. And what we're going to talk about today in particular is the application of training.
Before we begin, we just wanted to tell the audience that you can use a Q&A button to ask any questions at any time, and we'll be happy to answer them throughout our presentation today.
So here is the agenda for the next 40 minutes or so. We've introduced ourselves. We're going to talk about the history of this company called Strivr, and then talk about why virtual reality is a very special medium, very different from other media that we've used in the past. Then we're going to get down in the weeds. We're going to talk about which companies are using VR to train, what they're finding, how it works, and why it works. And of course, then we're going to be thrilled to answer your questions. So let's begin with the history of VR. The history of Strivr begins actually, on this graph, you see the year 2015. The history of Strivr actually begins in 2005. A bright young Stanford student named Derek Belch took my virtual people class, the class I've been teaching at Stanford since 2003. And at the end of class, this was in the year 2005, Derek says, "Jeremy, you think we could use VR to train athletes?" I said, "Derek, that's a brilliant idea. Why don't you come back in a decade because the technology isn't ready yet?" 10 years later, he comes back. He gets his master's thesis working in my lab while he was an assistant coach on the Stanford football team. And Derek performs a Herculean task. He convinces Coach David Shaw, a very brilliant and forward-thinking individual. He convinces Coach to give us 5 minutes of practice time on Mondays. And Coach allows us to come on the field with our very heavy equipment to capture 360 video. Then was very difficult. We had this pretty intense rig to capture video. And what we would capture was our defense would pretend to be the team we were playing that Saturday. And they would run about 10 plays. We'd film them. We would then go back to the lab and we'd stitch all of these plays together so that they'd work in the goggles. And then we'd put the goggles inside the football office. And from Wednesday to Friday, our team would practice in VR. And when I say practice, we're not teaching them how to kick or throw or run around. They know how to do that. We're giving them extra mental repetition. So at the quarterback position in American football, quarterback goes to the line of scrimmage and he's got to look around and recognize a pattern. That pattern is what the defense is doing. He's then got to make a decision. Do I keep the original play or do I go to the next play in the queue? That's called kill, 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 to go to the next play, or to let it roll and to keep the original play. In addition, he can decide to move a blocker around. A running back can move position to pick up a block. So basically, the job of the quarterback is pattern recognition, look around and see a pattern, make a decision based on that pattern, and then communicate that decision to others. Tell them if they change the play. After 3 weeks, the work we were doing was so effective in the eyes of Coach David Shaw, he made it mandatory to the players. At the end of that season, and Stanford outperformed expectations. Both the quarterback, Kevin Hogan, and the coach, David Shaw, both of those individuals say one of the reasons Stanford did so well that season was due to these extra mental repetitions and extra practice that they got. Now, Derek graduates on January 2nd in 2015, and like many Stanford students, the next day he's got a startup. The startup is named Strivr, and Derek proceeds to shock the world by signing 5 NFL teams to multi-year contracts in a few months. So we went from just, this is Derek's master's project and we did it in my lab, to Derek just goes out, builds this company, sells it to a number of teams. And if you look on the slide at the year 2016, here's an example of just the leagues we're working in. We're not going to list all the teams. There's too many to put on this slide, but we are, Derek's genius and hard work literally has changed the way athletes are training. The next step in Strivr is we were in Arkansas and we had an executive from Walmart. One of the teams we train is the Arkansas Razorbacks. And this executive came and he did the demo. He put on the goggles and he said, what you're doing with quarterbacks, which is look around, recognize a pattern, make a decision based on that pattern, and then tell your colleagues about it, that pretty much describes every job that we do at Walmart. And so what we began was a long process of thinking about and then implementing how we can change the way Walmart's of employees train. And Yelena is going to go into a lot more details later on, but it was an amazing kind of aha moment where we said, it's not just about athletes. It's really about everybody. In order to make their jobs, to do better at their jobs, they've got to look around, see the world, make a decision, sometimes under intense and arousing conditions, and then tell others about it. And what you see on the slide now is on the right side is a sampling of some of the companies that we're working with. We're working with many companies in the Fortune 500 space. These are some that we can talk about today. So many of you who have not spent time in this area remember I've been a VR guy for 20 years now. Why would you use virtual reality to train? There's this misconception that VR is for gaming, it's for entertainment. Why would you use it for training? And so in my lab at Stanford, we have been studying intensely running experiments to see how VR affects the mind, to see how training works, what applications are good fits and which ones are not. What you're seeing here is one of our classic demonstrations. And I'm going to take you back in time in history because I really want you to understand a concept called presence. Presence is, to get away from the jargon, basically the notion of presence says the brain treats a VR experience as if it were real. And in the year 2001, we flew all of my lab's hardware, this was back when I was at UC Santa Barbara, to Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., we presented at a conference at the Federal Judicial Center where we were talking about how one would use virtual reality in the courtroom. You could recreate crime scenes. You could do eyewitness testimony where witnesses put on the goggles and look at suspects. And part of the demo was to show people how intense and real VR feels. And what you're seeing in that demo is a woman doing what we call walking the plank. She sees in the goggles, it looks just like the room that she's in, but we've dropped a chasm. That chasm is 10 meters deep, and she's got to walk across that plank to get the other end of the chasm. It's about a 2-3 meter walk across. In the year 2001, we were running this demo. We had a federal judge. He was probably in his mid to late 60s. He was a big guy. And when he was walking across that plank, he took by accident a step to his left. Of course, we track his body movements and we model gravity. So what he saw and what he heard was the floor, the bottom of that pit rushing towards him. And if you were in the real world and you wanted to save your life, the only way to live would be to dive at a 45-degree angle up in the physical world, because in the virtual world, you see the lip of that plank getting farther away from you. So this federal judge decided to dive at a 45-degree angle in the middle of the air in front of a room of 500 lawyers and trial judges. And, this is a funny story because he didn't get hurt and, he didn't put us in jail and nobody got sued. But this illustrates the concept of presence, that the front of your brain may be telling you that this is not real, that it's just a simulation, but the back part of your brain, the one that's designed to keep you alive, cannot overcome the illusion. We like to say the brain is not yet evolved to differentiate really well done VR from an actual experience. And so as a presumption, the reason I spend so much valuable time on this story, you have to believe that the VR feels so real, the brain responds as if it were an actual experience. And what I've spent 15 years doing at Stanford is studying that exact phenomenon. So on the next slide here, I want you to look on the right side first, and this is my book that just came out January 30th. It's called Experience on Demand: What Virtual Reality Is, How It Works, and What It Can Do. And for those of you that are interested in this topic, this is literally everything I know about this topic really put into one place, and I'm very proud of it, and I know that this comes off as a plug, but if you care about this topic, I poured my heart and soul into this book, and it's really about how, the summary of it is that if you want to win in your business, a lot of people make a mistake that they treat VR as a medium, and I don't think calling VR a media experience is the right way to think about it. I think that if you're going to succeed in business, you start with the assumption that VR is an actual experience. It's like actually doing something, and proceed accordingly. So when it comes to why you'd use VR for learning, my lab has been funded by the military for quite some time, where we do training. I've got a courtesy appointment at Stanford in the School of Education, where I build curricula based on VR. I worked directly with the provost of Stanford University to rethink Stanford's online learning activities. I'm really steeped into this topic. And when we talk about, I'm going to give you 5 reasons why VR is very special for training. The first one is what I spoke about earlier, which is that if you want someone to, really feel what it's like to be on a factory line or to be dealing with a harsh customer with VR, you're not just reading a manual or watching some video of someone else. Physiologically, you respond as if you're actually there. And it's a really important thing to give someone these extra mental repetitions. The second is that, my book is called Experience on Demand because this is the incredible part, that you can wake up at 3 in the morning, put on the goggles, and it's noon in the middle of a huge Walmart store, and there's people all over the place. Anytime, anywhere, for $0 extra, you can relive that experience. And one of the things that made this so special in football is that our athletes, we didn't take away their physical practice time. We just gave them extra minutes to practice, and every morning they'd wake up and put on the goggles and visualize. And anytime you can just get better at your job, and it just takes a few minutes to really get that boost. The third reason is practice. Chapter 1 of my book is called Practice Makes Perfect. And there is a huge literature on neuroscience that basically says when you do stuff, the brain changes. This is a commonly held notion by neuroscientists and psychologists and all of those that think about training. We learn by doing. And VR gives you the opportunity to do extra times and get these extra repetitions. Some of our football quarterbacks, literally, these are backups that haven't hit the field yet. They get thousands of extra mental repetitions where they're reliving these plays. It's as if they were on the field. The brain's treating it as real. They have a huge advantage but when they get that special moment, they get put in the game, they've done this before. Their brain feels natural while they're in there. Their neurons get activated in the proper manner. It feels like they've been there before. The fourth reason why VR wins is if we think about VR training, it starts in 1929 with a guy named Edwin Link. Edwin Link invents something called the flight simulator. Turns out Mr. Link wanted to learn how to fly. He didn't want to do that from a manual. You don't want to learn how to fly from a training manual. We learn by doing stuff. We learn by doing stuff and making mistakes. And furthermore, we learn by doing stuff, making mistakes, and then getting feedback on how to do it correctly. That's how the learning process works. But if you're learning to fly, mistakes are super expensive, right? People die, planes are destroyed. It's a really bad thing to make a mistake in the air. Hence the flight simulator, which leverages everything that makes VR feel real, but gives you the opportunity to actually make mistakes and get that proper feedback. So it's a really neat aspect. The last instance on this bullet point is consistency. And this takes the idea, I teach at Stanford, and every once in a while I have a bad day, and every once in a while I've got a day that is I just crush it. It's the best lecture I've ever given, and you can just see it in their eyes. And what VR does is when we capture a scene or when we bring instruction in, we wait and iterate, and we find the absolute best special moment for instruction, and we have the perfect scenario, and it's the thing that could only happen once in a decade, and it's those experiences that we capture. And now when you're giving training, and we've all done training simulations run by moderators, every time that you do training, it's perfect. It's the best instantiation that was ever fathomed by those creating the training. And then similar to digital songs where you can just kind of extend those and redo them, digital stuff is the same every single time. And one of the huge benefits that we're seeing in the corporate space is complete and utter consistency in something where it feels like you're there and it feels like there's a group of people, and psychologically and physiologically and from a brain science standpoint, boy, this is just like the real thing, but it's exactly the same every single time and it's always optimal. And that's a really neat thing.
So now that we have spent quite some time talking about VR, let's talk a little bit about the enterprise training landscape. If you look at the slide that you see in front of you, there is really, from our experience, two axes on which training is being measured today. The horizontal one is how effective the training is. But what is also really important in enterprise space is how scalable the solution could be. And if we look at what is available today on the market, one-on-one expert mentoring that you see on the slide right now is definitely one of the most effective training ways to train, based on what have Jeremy talked about in the VR space, and from the perspective of how do you learn the best is you practice and you get the feedback back. But are you going to hire a mentor for every single person in your organization? Probably not. That's where scale doesn't, that's where one-on-one mentoring cannot scale. On-the-job training is definitely another very effective way of training, but how many people can shadow somebody on the job? And keep in mind as well, as the person who's being shadowed is their productivity goes down as well. So while it's very effective, it's definitely not a scalable solution. And then we move into the classes. The classrooms definitely begin to address the scale issue, but definitely we lose a little bit from the effectiveness perspective. Classes can be from a small 5 people class to a 200 class audience, and can you actually keep everyone engaged? That's where effectiveness is really coming from. And there's definitely manuals that are very, very scalable. You can print them, or you can have a digital version that could be distributed to everyone on any device, as well as videos and 2D. And now it's very scalable solutions, but not really effective. So how do we get into that right corner where we have a very highly effective and highly scalable solution? And based on everything that Jeremy just talked about, VR is definitely making that a perfect fit for being highly effective because of how people learn, and they learn by doing, as well as it's very scalable because you can reproduce it whether it's in different locations or different parts of the world. We'll talk a little bit about learning by doing and kind of bringing back together everything that Jeremy has talked about, but talking more in details about what examples do we have for you. And if there's one thing we want you to take away from here is this acronym, RIDE. It's rare, impossible, dangerous, and expensive.
Yeah, thanks, Yelena. So one of the things I like to say when I've got an audience like you guys, which is clearly decision makers in your industry, is VR is not for everything. And one thing that makes me super proud to be a part of Strivr is that we do not foist VR upon applications that work just fine in other instances. So when we looked at the slide that Yelena presented so brilliantly, some things the manual works just fine for. Something you don't need to have this realism. If it's a list of people to call in an emergency, you don't need VR for that. You know, the list of names works just fine for that. So VR is a very special medium, and there's things that make it unique. And in our opinion at Strivr, we save VR for things that justify that medium, and we don't waste VR on things that the list of names would have worked just fine. And so RIDE summarizes this. The first instance is rare. And these are, let's save VR for experiences that you just couldn't do otherwise. And with a lot of our companies, we work with training people on how to operate the factory line and how to work on machinery. And why this is an instance of rare is that these factory lines are running nonstop. In some instances, 24/7. To shut them down so that you could train someone on a new person who you're hiring, dozens per day, it's really difficult to find the time to train them on that. And this is a really home run use case because you can simply not have to shut down the factory to train people, not have to build an entire new training facility, which is not a good analog anyway because they're always changing. So VR historically is really good for experiences that are so rare in the real world that you wouldn't be doing them otherwise. Impossible. So this is, the bread and butter of VR is let's use VR for things that you just couldn't possibly do otherwise. And what you're seeing here is a screenshot from Holiday Rush at Walmart. And Yelena is going to talk more about this application. But it turns out that about half of Walmart employees have never experienced Black Friday due to the high turnover. They've never experienced Holiday Rush because there's a high turnover in the company. Now, if you want to mentally and physically and physiologically prepare someone for how brutal and intense that day is going to be, and to give them the coping strategies and the proper places to stand and where to look and where to say, you cannot do that. You can hire 300 actors and put them in a fake store, but you are not going to replicate the urgency, the intensity, the emotions that those customers are going to be having. And only in VR can you capture that. So that's an instance of using VR for something that would be impossible otherwise. Dangerous is the example that we took right from the flight simulator, right? So we learn in VR how to fly because learning how to fly in an actual plane is dangerous. And so many workplace applications related to safety come into here, training salespeople to go onto work sites. We'll talk more about that later on. And then the final one are things that are super expensive. And one of the things I've researched academically that Strivr is succeeding greatly and now working with companies is, can you train someone on interpersonal interactions? If I'm giving a difficult conversation to a number of employees, if I am giving a speech in front of 70 people, it's really expensive to hire actors that are going to make it feel as if I'm actually doing this conversation. In VR, you build it once, then you have it forever. You can show it to thousands of people, and it cuts down on costs greatly. So try to remember the acronym RIDE. We should use VR for things that are rare, impossible, dangerous, or expensive. Another way of saying this is that, as a professor, as a co-founder of Strivr, and, as just an evangelist for citizens, if years from now you guys are putting on VR goggles so you can read your email, then somewhere we went wrong as a field. We should be saving VR for things that are special.
Great, thank you there, Jeremy. There's one more thing I kind of want to expand on, the expensive part of it. We'll talk about it a little bit later as well, but one of our customers is an airline that actually they have to book the plane and have employees come in the middle of the night in order to train. So that's definitely something that's very expensive because you have to take the plane out of the service. Or the insurance company that we have, one of our clients as well, where flooded basement is a very common problem in the Midwest for sure. So how do you train your employees without spending a lot of money on recreating that experience? And that's where VR definitely plays an essential role as well. So let's talk a little bit about the Strivr and enterprise. And we are very lucky here at Strivr to have Jeremy as a co-founder. We also have a neuroscientist in-house that we use both of their expertise in order to really create our product. So our product really begins with science and scientifically proven methods that make the training the most effective. Our platform is data-driven, and as a part of our platform, you can create effective immersive experiences. Any L&D person can do that. So you do not require any technical knowledge or any coding experience in order to create great immersive experiences. Our product allows you to train in a classroom and provides you tools in order to keep the classroom engaged, as well as practice one-on-one. And coaching experience is another one use case that is how other enterprise users are using us today. Analyzer is definitely a very big part. We believe in data, and usage and engagement is something we collect all the time, from how many people logged in to training, the content that they have viewed, and how satisfied they are with the experience that they're seeing. The behavioral data that we collect from head checking, the attention, and the gaze conversion points to learning experiences, retention, and accuracy. And Jeremy here can chime in talking more about our data analytics platform.
Yeah, so thanks, Yelena. I'd like to expand on 2 points. First is I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Michael Casale, our in-house neuroscientist. And just being able to say that we have an in-house neuroscientist is so cool, because Dr. Casale was trained in cognitive neuroscience by the great Greg Ashby at UC Santa Barbara. His dissertation was on understanding the way the brain changes during the learning process and encoding information, and then how that transfers to tasks later on. I mean, you couldn't imagine a more perfect person to be driving the science of what we're doing. The problem is that most great neuroscientists go into academia, and we were lucky enough to lure Dr. Casale away from academia and have him in-house. On the data side, this is, this is, people often do not realize the intense opportunities that's afforded by VR. So in virtual reality, when you're walking or using a system, you're typically moving your head around and moving your hands around. When you're doing that, the system has to redraw the scene about 90 frames a second. So for your head, there's 6 things we measure: X, Y, and Z, which is movement, and pitch, yaw, roll, which is rotation. We do the same thing for both hands. So we collect the data 90 frames a second. We're tracking 18 movements each frame. If you do the math, during a 20-minute training session, we have just under 2 million data points recorded about your body language. And what I've been studying in the lab since 2003, and what we're now doing at Strivr at scale, is asking the question, using machine learning, what can you predict about somebody based on their body movement? So one of my PhD students, who she now runs a VR lab at Cornell, she ran a study where she recorded body language of learners while they were being trained, and ran many, many learners, so she got enough data to do big data analysis, and then trained systems where the input was how you were moving your body during learning, and the output was your test score or the learning transfer effects. And she demonstrated with 86% accuracy that you could predict if somebody was going to be a good, a high or low performer based on how they moved their body while receiving the information. So the big idea is that people can kind of fake what they say, but when you're learning how you move your body, really tells a more compelling story. Now with Strivr, when we do the work in the lab at Stanford, we have, sometimes 100 subjects, sometimes 200. We have hundreds of thousands of use cases. And so we've been able to, working with Dr. Casali, who's an expert on machine learning and who really knows how the brain works, have a set of data at scale that no one has ever seen before in the field of VR. Hundreds of thousands of people who are using these systems, and we're tracking their body movements during instruction. Then we know how they're doing later on the job, so we can actually train in machine learning. There's a famous sentence, it's called garbage in, garbage out. We have really good training for the output layer because we know how they're doing on the job. So what we've developed are simulations, machine learning algorithms where you can literally predict how well someone's going to be on the job based on how they're moving when they're training in VR. And it's just, you can't oversell the importance of this. It's really neat.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. And if you think about an enterprise, where does our platform actually fits in? And on the bottom here, you see it, the way we see it, it's from hire to retire. You can use our experience, you can create an experience with our platform that will allow you to effectively assess your hiring candidate, to shorten your onboarding time, to redeploy your sales force from your working force from one area of the business to another based on your needs of the organization. The people development, the soft skills development that Jeremy has talked about. With our platform, you are going to be able to create and train any experiences based on the need of your organization. And now we'll talk a little bit about, so what are those companies that have used us, and what is the experience that you see from here? In the years our company been live, we have trained over 200,000 people across those 6 companies. And as you can see, we have driven the training time down. We have improved customer satisfaction, improved the knowledge retention, and drove the training costs down, as well as drove the employee engagement up. And we will talk in a second in more details about some of those use cases. So let's talk about Walmart. I think we have mentioned several times on this call already the Black Friday, the difficult and impossible situation that you need to train. And Walmart is not unique in this case. Black Friday happens once a year, and retailers hire thousands of new employees in order for them to serve the customers when they come in at Black Friday. And to train something like that can be very cumbersome. You cannot really hire the trainers in order to recreate this experience. So what we have done with Walmart is that we have actually spent one of the Fridays on Black Friday recording the footage for this training that has been used in the following year in 200 plus academies to train their employees how does real Black Friday actually feels, in order for them to feel comfortable to be on the floor in this chaotic environment. Not only did we teach in classroom how the Black Friday experience happens, but as well as Walmart used us as a kiosks. and one-on-one experiential learning on this, how to handle difficult customers in those situations. Walmart have seen 30% higher employee satisfaction after they've been trained in VR. Their scores have increased significantly. As you can see here, 70% of students using VR scored higher on the exams. And employee overall felt a lot more comfortable and confident to be there on the floor handling those difficult situations. Another great example we have here is from Fidelity. Their customer satisfaction has improved by 10%. The use case here was very simple. They have a lot of people on the call in their call centers who, while taking the calls with the customers, don't really have empathy for the customer and don't really know what situation the customer is in. But the truth of the matter is that those customers can be experiencing very difficult financial situations because of the death in the family or the bankruptcy or something bad is happening to them. And every single use case that customer service rep is handling on the phone can make a big difference in people's life. And so what we have done in VR, we have really created an experience where you can train without and be able to make mistakes in an environment where it's not going to cost somebody harm in their life by trying to take in the call from the user, but also seeing that user from the side, so from third-party perspective. And really, this training have driven customer satisfaction and Fidelity by 10% because now the employees had a lot more empathy and were able to perform much better on the call and not only recall the names of the customers they're talking with, but actually help them in the situation that is the most critical.
So, Yelena, this is a great use case. And for me, this one resonates particularly because, as a professor, I've been studying the way that virtual reality causes empathy as a medium since the year 2003. And, chapter 3 of the book is called Walking a Mile in the Shoes of Another. And we go through every single academic study that has shown that when you wear someone's body, when you experience what it's like to be them for a day, when you're with them and walking a mile in their shoes, in general, this tends to change your attitudes and behaviors towards that person more than, reading about them or watching a movie. And professors, our dream is when we publish academic research and then somebody actually uses it. And this is a case where, dozens of my papers published in science journals showing VR causes empathy and this changes the way people behave. We came up with an amazing use case. Fidelity, was really, thought hard and came up with this brilliant opportunity here. And let's have people become more caring towards another person and by seeing what it's like. So these folks in the call center, they put on the goggles and all of a sudden they're in this woman's living room and they can see she's got crutches against the wall and that she can't actually walk and that there's a stack of bills up. And what we then do is they relive the scene another time after they have gone to visit the person's living room, and we change the questions that they ask or the answers that they give. And what we see is an evolution, which is when you repeat this experience after having been with that person viscerally, experientially, that makes you ask questions that are more helpful to the person. And that's why they're seeing a 10% increase in their customer satisfaction ratings since they've started using VR. It changes the care, the level of caring that the people display when they're talking to them.
One last example we'll talk about is a BMW. So the safe work environment is extremely important for the efficiency and work engagement. And so with BMW, the use case that we've had was to train 6S training program to their employees. Prior to Strivr, they used to teach them through a PowerPoint presentations. And when we came in and created a training with them, what we have done is we have run essentially an A/B test. We wanted to compare how if somebody performs well on a test and then being put in the virtual environment, are they going to be able to identify all those mistakes that they were able to catch on during taking the test in the real environment? Because from the research from Jeremy's lab says that the experience that you see in virtual reality, actually your brain will translate that in the real world environment. You're going to be able to identify that when you are on a production floor, actually in a BMW facility. And so the result that we actually have seen is that people who have gotten 100% test results on a paper, only 20% more 20% of those people were actually able to identify those mistakes when they were put in the virtual environment. So that actually tells you of how much more effective the training in virtual reality is compared to the paper. Not only that, but virtual reality training experience definitely provides more engaging environment for you. And what we have seen was BMW is 99% of the employees surveyed were actually very satisfied with the training and would recommend this training again. And this is another important part, that training is not being seen as something dreadful that employees have to do, but it's actually something engaging and exciting, that training that employees have something to look forward to as well.
I mean, I love this example, Yelena, because so often we see in academia that people, they learn how to take a test, and you take this class and you do these readings, but you're actually learning it solely because you know that it's going to be questions on a test, and you learn how to take a test. What VR does is it puts you in a situation, we call this learning transfer. Does this academic, quote unquote, academic knowledge that you're learning from reading the manual, how are you going to behave when faced with an intense and arousing situation? And what the BMW data are showing is that, you know, when you do the traditional learning through questionnaires in a pamphlet, when you're reading about it in a manual, you get really good at taking multiple choice questions, but it doesn't transfer to this experience where you have to look in the proper spot and you have to stand in the proper spot. You have to say the right thing at the right time. It's only the experience that provides that. And it's a subtle example, but it's actually, when we think about it, it's critical, which is that you can't assess learning by giving somebody, you know, this multiple choice test. You have to see what they're going to do in an important situation.
So kind of to bring it all together, we understand that VR can be, it's something new, it's shiny, but it's also can be overwhelming when you think about it, bringing immersive training experience in a world of enterprise. And that's where our company is actually providing everything full service, from the customer needs identification to a full solution. We will hold your hand through picking out the hardware, through figure out what is the best use case that VR is good for. As Jeremy has mentioned before, we definitely are not trying to substitute all the trainings that you have already in-house, because we believe that there is a specific use cases that are best trained in VR, but definitely there are best case scenarios that may be better trained in the classroom setting by the instructor and not through the experiencing it. So we have a solutions and services team that will work with your team to figure out how to integrate it as a part of your curriculum, how to roll it out across the locations and geographies, and our software, something that we will teach your trainers how to use, as well as our user experience is very intuitive. So with our software, you will be able to create the learning experience yourself without needing any additional knowledge, and we will hold your hand through the rest of the process as well. Our success is in the ROI that you as a customer are going to get at the end of the process working with us. That will conclude our presentation, and we'd love to move to the Q&A.
So use the Q&A button, please, to ask a question now at any time, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
We do not have any questions in the queue yet. Let's give it a couple of minutes.
Okay, so this is Jeremy here. One of the questions we have here is, what is the standard length of a VR presentation? And this really goes back to the notion of VR as an experience. And I think this is critical. Where people go wrong in VR is they think that, oh, a feature-length movie should be in VR, or you know, a half-hour-long newscast should be in VR. And in my research, you know, when you're talking about learning and really important transformational learning, these tend to be experiences that are fairly short. So, what is it like to be in that flooded basement, and where you're supposed to look and where you're not supposed to stand? With Holiday Rush, just the cacophony and the intensity of people all around you and yelling at you, in 5 minutes you get it, and you get it in a way that's there's no other way to haven't gotten there. So the first answer to that is that if you think about, if the way you're thinking about training is an actual experience, you realize it doesn't need to be hours. It can be minutes. In general, some of the longest training simulations we ever do are about 20 minutes. We have different ones that people come back different days, but 20 minutes tends to be the max. With athletes, one of our best athletes that is a big champion of the technology is a guy named Carson Palmer, and he used to train about 5 or 6 days a week using VR, but he would only do it for about between 5 and 10 minutes in the morning. And so it's not as if you need to do this for hours. I mean, if you think of it as an experience, what are the experiences that make you better at your job? If you recall this very special transformative moment, that's what we do in VR. So the answer is 20 minutes tends to be the max, and sometimes we're shorter than that. And there's themes of learning, which is it's much better to show people lots of experiences that are slightly different. We call it varied learning, as opposed to very long singular ones.
So another great question we have is, do you partner with companies to develop product and pilots? And the answer is yes. We are building our product, our platform on a regular basis, and we are always looking for design partners that we can experience and create new opportunities with.
So the next question I'm seeing is, what is interactivity in VR, and what are the limits of interactivity? And I'm thankful for this question, because I realized there's something I wanted to say earlier and didn't, which is VR is all about moving your body. The whole point of VR is that you're wearing these goggles and we're tracking how your head moves. You can turn around 360. You can look up, down, behind you. You can move your hands in VR. And interactivity is really the secret sauce of VR. So I publish research, and I'm happy to send anybody afterward this talk. I can send you these papers showing that if you want learning transfer to work in VR, you have to do simulations that encourage body movements, because it's really about, the theory here is called embodied cognition, which is that these muscle movement and getting the memory in terms of how you've moved your body while learning information is actually conducive to learning transfer later on. So I think interactivity is critical, and we can talk about interactivity in terms of moving objects around a scene, and I think that's really special and important to do. But from my perspective, what makes VR special at the very beginning is simply ensuring that people are actually moving their body. One thing that depresses me as a professor is when I see someone's built this VR scene, and then you watch someone doing the VR and they're standing like a statue, not moving their head, staring straight ahead. And to me, there's something wrong with VR if there's not that interactive body movement.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you all for all the questions. I just wanted, before I answer the next question, I just wanted to let you know that we will definitely go through all the questions after the webinar, and we will send it out. So please don't hesitate and keep those questions coming. The next question that is about scalability. Can you talk more about how it can scale for an audience of 500 plus people? So Walmart is actually a great example of the scale that we have, and we're probably one of the only companies out there that does have a scalable virtual reality solution here. It depends. The answer is depends. It depends how you want to train it. So definitely with devices like Oculus Go that just came out on the market, and something that we're working with, you can easily have training into as many locations as you want around the world, and our software is going to be able to allow you to, and allows us today to control all the devices and control the content management, do all the updates, software updates. So with our platform, you will get constant software updates. And if the new content libraries are created, that will be pushed to all the devices at the same time. So scalability in enterprise is definitely one of the stronger points for us.
Can I chime in on that one? Because I've been doing VR for 20 years, and I remember this the first system we installed for the National Football League was with the Dallas Cowboys. And, you know, I'm a guy that's done VR for a while. It's always been this very expensive and fragile equipment. And we're in Dallas, and we set this up. They had this special VR football room, and we got it all set up. And one of the quarterbacks comes in, and I'll never forget this because we just, we bled over setting this thing up. And he puts his ice cream right on top of the VR system. And I just watched this ice cream dripping down onto the machine and onto the hardware. And, that's something that would have given me a heart attack years ago, but the technology has gotten robust, and, watching this stuff survive in the field when people are dumping their ice cream on it, that's been really exciting to me. We, when you talk about hundreds of thousands of use cases, which is what we're doing right now. I've been doing VR for a while. There's a couple extra zeros there. No one's been able to do this before. It's part of what makes this company special is the work required to make it be seamless and work at scale, and it's really special to watch. I like to call Strivr the democratization of VR. The first time that it's not just athletes or people in the military or professors at universities. We are putting this in all sorts of places, and people are using it all the time. It's really neat.
Thank you, Jeremy. One other great question we love to answer is: can you do all your interpersonal training by yourself, or do you need the help from colleague or someone else? That's a great question. So we do have an experience that allows you to actually train your interpersonal skills by yourself. We actually believe that when you want to create an error-free environment for somebody, this is the best way to learn. How do you learn how to give radical feedback to somebody, how to hold a difficult conversation? So our experience, you can just put a headset on, go into the room and practice as many times as you want. That can also be used as a coaching mechanism as well. You can train by yourself, but then when you're ready to actually get somebody else's opinion, you are able to share your session with somebody else and get that opinion, or have them be with you in a room while you are in a headset answering the questions, and the person can help you how to answer the next question better. We believe very strongly that teaching the framework of how to answering is what you get the best in VR. So definitely you can do it on your own and does not require anybody else to be there with you.
Yeah, we've got this amazing soft skills trainer where you're, doing a difficult conversation. It could be a medical conversation. It could be about having to hire or fire somebody. It could be a conversation related to performance where you've got to really give someone tough feedback. And the neat thing about mistakes being free is if you say something that you're not proud of, it's something that you feel bad that you said that to that person, and had you said it in the real world, and forget getting yourself fired, it would have ruined that person's day. These are the mistakes we want you to make in VR. That's the point of it. You should feel free to talk how you would, get feedback, and that can be from an AI automatically, or it can be from yourself listening to it a second time, or it could be from a coach if you want to have a coach who's going to keep things confidential. All those models work, but I really believe the flight simulator, mistakes that would crush you, the same thing goes for interpersonal interaction, and VR is just perfect for it.
Thank you, everyone. We will send out this recording as well as answer all those questions that we have from you. But thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And please, if you want to reach out and you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll be happy to answer any more questions that you have.
Thank you, guys.